Have you ever felt the sting of being spoken to in a way that made you question your worth, yet you stayed, hoping that somehow it would turn into love? There's a quiet ache in the heart of a woman who hears words that bruise but doesn't know if she's allowed to walk away. Because somewhere along the line she was taught to endure, to be patient, to give love, even when it's wrapped in silence or sarcasm, or the sharp edge of someone else's pain. And slowly, without realizing, she begins to believe maybe this is all she deserves. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones we can see. They're the ones embedded in the stories we were told about love. Stories that made us accept crumbs as meals. Stories that told us that a woman who sets boundaries is too much, too dramatic, or not understanding enough. And so we shrink. We silence ourselves. We try to be the version of love that hurts the least. But inside, a quiet voice still asks, why does this feel so wrong? Louise Hay, with her gentle wisdom, always reminded us that our thoughts create our reality, but words, especially the ones we absorb from someone we love, shape our emotional skin. And when those words are laced with control, dismissal, or mockery, they don't just hurt. They plant weeds in the garden of our self-worth. We start to second-guess what we feel. We wonder if maybe we are too sensitive. We apologize for our own hearts. And yet, every woman carries within her a compass, a quiet but unwavering sense of truth that pulses when something is off. Maybe you've felt it, like a tightness in your chest when you're told you're overreacting, like a sudden drop in your stomach when a joke feels like a jab. That's not weakness. That's your soul whispering, "This doesn't honor me." Brené Brown speaks about the courage of naming what hurts. She reminds us that boundaries are not betrayals. They're the deepest form of self-respect. When a man uses language that dims your light, that makes you feel small, ashamed, or invisible, that's not love. That's fear masquerading as power. And your body knows. Your spirit knows. You just need permission to listen. But what if that permission didn't have to come from him? What if it didn't even need to come from outside of you? What if it was already yours to claim? Because here's the truth that no one may have told you yet. Recognizing the words that wound is not harsh. It's not cold. It's sacred. It's healing. It's the first step toward remembering that you were never meant to live inside someone else's pain. You were never meant to be a container for his projections, or a mirror for his unhealed wounds. You were meant to bloom, and sometimes, blooming requires walking away from the garden where nothing grows. Let's go deeper. Let's name what has been silencing your heart. And sometimes the first sign that something is off isn't a scream. It's a sentence. A phrase so casual, so seemingly harmless, that you almost don't notice how it makes your chest tighten or your eyes blur for a second longer than usual. You're overreacting. Lighten up. Maybe he said it with a smirk, or maybe with a sigh. But what lingered wasn't his tone. It was the echo of all the times your emotions were too loud for someone else's comfort. You might remember being a little girl, crying over something that mattered deeply to you, only to be told, "Stop being dramatic." You learned early on that your feelings were inconvenient, that tears were too much, that anger was unattractive, so you started hiding them. You turned your reactions inward. And now, when a man says you're overreacting, it doesn't just hurt. It confirms a lie you've been carrying, that you can't trust your own heart. But here's something Louise Hay would gently place in your hands. Every feeling you have is a message. It's not too big. It's not too small. It's yours. And invalidating language isn't just dismissive. It's a form of erasure. It trains you to doubt your inner compass. It makes you seek permission to feel, to speak, to simply exist. What if, instead of shrinking, you paused and asked yourself, why does this upset me? Not as a way of blaming yourself, but as a way of returning to yourself. Because every reaction carries a story. Every tear has a root. And dismissing your emotions doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you quieter. Quieter to others. And sometimes, to yourself. There's a kind of rain that comes without thunder. It doesn't demand attention, but it still soaks everything. That's how emotional dismissal feels. Like clouds that weren't supposed to be there, being told to disappear. But you are not a passing storm. You are weather and wonder and worth. And if someone tells you to lighten up when your heart is heavy, it's not your cue to be less. It's your cue to listen deeper. Because when the world tries to silence your emotions, that's when you need them most. E agora? Vamos falar sobre aquela frase disfarçada de brincadeira, que às vezes fere mais do que um grito. It often starts with a laugh, or at least, what's supposed to sound like one. I was just joking. Can't you take a joke? But there's a sting beneath the smile, isn't there? Something in your body freezes. Your mind rewinds the moment over and over, trying to decide if it really was funny, or if it was just another small wound wrapped in sarcasm. When you've been taught to keep the peace, humor can become a mask. You laugh along, not because it's amusing, but because it's safer, because calling it out might make you the difficult one, because deep down, you've learned that questioning a man's tone, even when it hurts, can cost you his affection. And affection, even when it's laced with harm, sometimes feels better than being alone. But let's pause here. Louise Hay believed that every word carries energy, and when someone cloaks disrespect in a joke, it doesn't make it harmless. It makes it harder to name. Emotional harm doesn't need to scream to be real. Sometimes it whispers through sentences dressed as just teasing, until you begin to wonder if your discomfort is the problem, rather than his lack of tenderness. You might find yourself thinking, maybe I'm too sensitive, or he didn't mean it like that. And so, another thorn settles quietly beneath your skin. You carry it, pretend it's nothing, and yet, it still pricks you. Over time, enough of those hidden thorns can turn even the strongest woman brittle. Not because she's weak, but because she's been bleeding invisibly. There's a sacred moment when a woman chooses to name what hurts, not with anger, but with clarity. That wasn't funny. Those 3 words hold power. They're not accusations. They're boundaries. They're a way of saying, I see myself clearly now, and I refuse to be the punchline in someone else's discomfort. A rose remains beautiful, even with its thorns, but it's never meant to be handled carelessly. Neither are you. And if the person you love needs to diminish you to feel strong, it's not love. It's fear in disguise. Now let's look at the kind of sentence that doesn't tease, but tests. The one that turns love into performance. If you loved me, you would... It sounds almost innocent, like a plea, like a call for connection. But underneath, there's a transaction being set in motion. A weight handed to you, quietly, subtly, that says love must be earned. That affection is a prize, and your heart somehow is on trial. This kind of phrase doesn't come out of nowhere. It finds its way into the lives of women who, from a very young age, were praised more for their obedience than their authenticity, who learned that being loved often meant being agreeable, that to be chosen, they had to become what someone else needed, even at the cost of themselves. So when a man links your worth to what you can do for him, what you can give, sacrifice, prove, it might feel familiar. It might even feel like love, but it's not. Because love that asks you to betray yourself is not love. It's performance. It's a role. It's a quiet erasure. Louise Hay spoke often about how we abandon ourselves when we seek validation outside of us. And this sentence, if you loved me, you would, is the kind of emotional contract that keeps women stuck in cycles of overgiving, of walking on eggshells, of trying harder and harder, just to feel seen. But no matter how much you give, it's never enough to fill someone else's emptiness, especially when that emptiness uses you as its bandage. The tragedy is that the more you try to prove your love, the more you lose access to the very love you're trying to offer. Because love without freedom is not intimacy, it's control. And control disguised as romance leaves you exhausted, confused, and questioning whether your own needs are even valid. Imagine a bird in a cage, singing just to be heard. At first, the cage looks beautiful, but over time, the air grows thinner, the melody quieter, and the spirit of the bird starts to fade. That's what it feels like to love someone who only values you for what you do, not for who you are. You are not meant to earn your place in someone's heart by bending, breaking, or disappearing. Your love is not a currency. It's a presence, and if it can't be received freely, it's not yours to give there. And now, let's step into one of the most common and most painful phrases a sensitive soul will ever hear, one that turns a sacred trait into something shameful. You're too sensitive. It slips out like a sigh, like an inconvenience, as if your emotions are a burden to someone else's comfort, as if feeling deeply is something to be corrected, not cherished. And when you hear it enough times, from parents, from partners, from the world, you start to believe it. You begin to see your softness not as strength, but as something wrong with you. Maybe no one ever told you that your sensitivity is sacred, that it's not a flaw, but a compass, that it allows you to feel the invisible, to read the spaces between words, to notice when something is off, long before anyone else does. But when you grow up in an environment that doesn't know how to hold emotional depth, you learn to doubt your own intuition. You begin to censor your heart. Louise Hay would remind you gently, what you feel is valid, always. Feelings aren't facts, but they are signals. They guide you toward what's true. And when someone calls you too sensitive, what they're often saying is, your truth makes me uncomfortable. But your truth deserves space. It deserves breath. It deserves reverence. You may have learned to adapt, to become the woman who smiles instead of cries, who says I'm fine when she's breaking inside, who apologizes for needing more tenderness, more presence, more truth. But here's what's real. Your need for emotional connection is not a weakness. It's your power. Your longing is holy. There's a kind of beauty in the woman who feels it all, who doesn't shut down, who stays open, even when the world tells her to harden. Imagine a moonlit pond, still and sensitive, touched by every breeze. That's you. That's your gift. Sensitivity is not fragility. It's the language of the soul. It's what makes you magnetic, intuitive, deep. And the man who tries to dim that light, who tells you to be less, feel less, need less, is not protecting you. He's protecting himself from having to rise and meet you at the level of real intimacy. Because real intimacy requires presence. It requires emotional fluency. It requires reverence for your tears, not ridicule. You are not too much. You are exactly enough for the right kind of love. For the kind of love that doesn't shrink in the face of emotion, but leans in. Now let's talk about the silence that settles when your needs are called too much, when asking for presence is met with distance. Stop being so needy. Those words don't always arrive in anger. Sometimes they're wrapped in disappointment, sometimes in silence. But however they come, they land like a verdict, as if needing someone, needing presence, reassurance, honesty, is somehow a flaw. A shameful weight you're meant to carry quietly, or not at all. But where did that belief begin? For many women, it traces back to moments where expressing a need led to rejection. Maybe you asked to be held and were met with coldness. Maybe you voiced your fear and were laughed at. Maybe you simply needed someone to stay, and they left. And so, over time, you learned that needing love was dangerous, that it made you too exposed, too vulnerable, too much. Louise Hay reminds us that our needs are not punishments, they're invitations. An open hand toward intimacy. To ask for support is not weakness. It is the rhythm of human connection. But when that rhythm is interrupted, when you are told your longing is too loud, you begin to internalize that your desire for closeness is a burden, and you start hiding your needs behind smiles, behind busyness, behind silence. But love, real love, requires visibility. It asks that you be fully present, fully seen. And that includes the parts of you that ache, that reach out, that whisper, I can't do this alone. To be emotionally whole, you must be allowed to ask, not demand, not beg, just ask. Simply, honestly, with the dignity of someone who knows her worth. There is no shame in saying, I need you here. There is no weakness in wanting to be held. There is no flaw in desiring connection. Your needs are not excess. They are sacred messengers. And when someone tells you otherwise, they are not exposing your fault. They are exposing their inability to meet you where real love lives. A well is not needy because it longs for rain. A well is generous because it holds space for what nourishes. And you, despite what they've made you believe, are allowed to hold that space. And now, what happens when the man in front of you claims he isn't ready, yet keeps you close enough to keep hoping? I'm not ready for a relationship. Don't pressure me. At first, it sounds like honesty, a man setting his boundaries. But soon, it becomes a paradox you're asked to live inside. He doesn't want a relationship, but he wants your time. He wants your body. He wants your comfort, just not your commitment. And you, so full of love and hope, begin to wait. Not because you don't see the red flags, but because you believe that maybe, just maybe, if you love him gently enough, he'll change. But what begins as patience quickly becomes a form of self-abandonment. Because while you wait, Your heart begins to shrink. You silence your needs. You downplay your dreams. You convince yourself that what you have is almost enough, that maybe one day he'll wake up and realize you were what he needed all along. Louise Hay would never ask you to hold your breath for someone else's awakening. She would tell you that your time, your energy, your presence, they are sacred. They are not meant to be spent in limbo, waiting for someone to choose you while you quietly unchoose yourself. This sentence, "I'm not ready," can be a smokescreen, a way for him to hold power without responsibility, to enjoy your warmth without stepping into the vulnerability that true intimacy demands. And each day you stay, hoping he'll shift, you lose a piece of the woman you were before you started bending to fit his pace. It takes enormous courage to walk away from a half-love, to recognize that clarity is also a form of care, that a man who truly respects you will not keep you guessing. He will not need to be convinced. Because love, in its purest form, isn't something we pressure or perform for. It's something we meet in mutual readiness. Imagine a vine wrapped tightly around a tree. At first it looks like harmony, but slowly, it starts to choke the tree's growth. What looks like closeness becomes confinement. And the only way for the tree to thrive is to create space. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you've finally decided to care for yourself more. And just when you think you've sorted it out, another phrase arrives, disguised as logic, but dripping with doubt. One that makes you second-guess the very intuition that's been trying to protect you all along. You're overthinking it. It's the kind of sentence that lands with a subtle slap, soft, but still sharp. You hear it when you begin to question something that doesn't feel right, when your body senses a shift, a disconnect, a shadow between his words and his actions. And instead of being met with curiosity or conversation, you're met with dismissal, as if your mind is your enemy, rather than your ally. But you weren't overthinking. You were sensing. You were attuned. You were trying to make sense of a space where something felt off. That is not a flaw. That is feminine wisdom in motion. Louise Hay always emphasized that the thoughts we think are not accidents. They are reflections of what our inner being is trying to show us. When a woman feels anxious, when she replays a moment over and over, it's often because she's felt something deeply real, but has no safe space to name it. Overthinking becomes the label used to silence intuition, to invalidate the gentle alarm bell ringing in your soul. And slowly, you begin to mistrust your own mind. You rewrite your instincts. You trade insight for doubt, all because someone else was uncomfortable with your awareness. But what if your thoughts are not wild horses to be tamed, but messengers? What if your worries aren't irrational, but evidence that something essential has been ignored? What if your overthinking is actually your soul asking, "Am I safe here? Am I honored here? Am I being seen?" There is power in putting pen to paper, in writing down what you feel, not to spiral, but to clarify. Because when the mind is overwhelmed, it's usually because the heart has gone unheard for too long. A compass doesn't scream, it points, quietly, precisely, unwaveringly. And even when no one else sees its value, it still points true north. Your thoughts, especially the ones that return in the silence, are pointing somewhere. Trust them. And just when your voice starts to rise again, when you begin to reclaim your truth, there comes another phrase, wrapped in tradition, in control, in quiet suppression, one that tells you how to belong by erasing who you are. That's not how we do things here. It doesn't sound cruel. It sounds like a rule, a boundary, a cultural norm perhaps. But underneath the surface, there's a message that strikes at the core of your identity. Be less of you. Fit into something that feels safer for me. It's not a dialogue. It's a directive. One that tells you your way of seeing, feeling, choosing is somehow wrong. For many women, this message isn't new. You've heard versions of it since you were young. Don't wear that. Don't speak like that. This is just how it is. Over time, these phrases become internalized, and suddenly you're living a life shaped by invisible fences. Not because you believe in them, but because questioning them might cost you love, belonging, or peace. But peace built on suppression is not peace. It's self-erasure. Louise Hay spoke of the immense healing that comes from self-acceptance. She believed that every time you deny your truth to make someone else comfortable, you build a wall inside. And eventually, that wall keeps you from even recognizing who you are beneath all the shoulds and silences. When a man says, "That's not how we do things here," what he often means is, "I don't want to grow. I want you to shrink." But relationships are not meant to be one-way roads. They are meant to expand both people, to stretch the soul into more compassion, more awareness, more freedom, not less. And yet, many women stay, not because they agree, but because they've been trained to conform, because fighting the current feels exhausting, because somewhere along the line, being chosen became more important than being known. But let me tell you this, a wildflower does not ask for permission to bloom. It grows where it is, defiantly beautiful, not to please, but simply to be. And you, no matter how often you've been told to dim, carry that same sacred defiance, that same light, to assert your values, your ways, your voice, is not rebellion, it's remembrance. You are not here to perform someone else's script. You are here to write your own. And finally, there comes a moment when the pain of staying silent becomes heavier than the fear of being left. When the words used to threaten you no longer bind you, but awaken you. Calm down, or I'll leave. It's not a statement. It's a threat wrapped in emotional withdrawal. And in that moment, what he's really saying is this: your emotions make me uncomfortable, so I will punish you with distance. I will teach you that your truth comes with consequences. And so you learn to tiptoe. You soften your tone. You silence your tears. Not because the pain went away, but because you've been conditioned to believe that expressing it might cost you everything. You shrink in the name of keeping the peace. You choose silence not because it feels safe, but because it feels less risky than abandonment. Louise Hay would never ask you to fear your feelings. She would remind you that emotional expression is not chaos. It's aliveness. That to cry, to tremble, to feel with depth is not to be out of control. It's to be fully human. And when someone weaponizes your emotions to manipulate or control you, they are not seeking connection. They are seeking dominance. Many women carry the unhealed imprint of emotional abandonment. Fathers who walked away during conflict. Partners who disappeared during arguments. Friends who ghosted when things got too real. So now, when a man says, "Calm down or I'll leave," your body remembers. It goes cold. It tries to self-correct. It begs you to stay quiet. Not for peace, but for survival. But that survival strategy comes at a cost. It teaches you that love is conditional, that your emotions are landmines, that you are lovable only when you are convenient. Let me say this with clarity. That is not love. That is fear. That is emotional exile disguised as relationship. And the longer you stay in that pattern, the more your nervous system believes it is the only kind of closeness available. But it's not. You're not too much. You're not unstable. You are not unworthy because your heart speaks loudly. You are a lighthouse, meant to shine, even when the sea is stormy. And if someone cannot stay present when the waves rise, they were never anchored in the first place. And now, we arrive at the heart of it all, a moment of reckoning. A reminder from Louise Hay, from your own intuition, from the quiet part of you that has always known. Your worth is not defined by how much you endure. It is revealed by how deeply you remember who you are. Harsh words aren't always loud. Sometimes they come softly, through phrases that sound like concern, like culture, like care, but they carry a weight. And if you've lived long enough inside those phrases, you begin to forget the sound of your own truth. Louise Hay reminds us, the words we speak to ourselves can heal, but the words we accept from others, especially when wrapped in power, shame, or silence, can wound us if we're not awake. And awareness, she taught, is the beginning of all change. Awareness is love in action. The truth is, when a man speaks to you in ways that diminish your essence, it's not a reflection of your value. It's a mirror of his pain, his fear, his unwillingness to meet himself, and by extension, to meet you. But you are not responsible for his journey. You are responsible for your sanctuary, for your emotional home, for the garden of your own heart. Brené Brown reminds us that daring to set boundaries is an act of courage, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away, not in bitterness, but in reverence for your soul. Turning your back doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've remembered you matter too. Imagine a field, one that has been trampled, neglected, overgrown. And then, one day, a woman walks through it, not to escape, but to replant, to choose, to begin again. That woman is you. And when you begin to stand firm, something changes. You stop waiting for closure. You stop shrinking for love. You stop explaining your worth. And you start to bloom, not for someone else to notice, but because the soil inside you has become rich again, ready again, sacred again. If these words spoke to something inside you, if a part of you felt seen, named, or even gently shaken, I invite you to breathe that in. Let it settle. Let it remind you that you are not alone on this path. And if this message brought clarity to your heart, consider subscribing. This space is for you, a place of truth, of tenderness, of transformation. And if you're ready to keep going, there's another video waiting for you on the screen. One more step toward remembering who you really are.